Hello and welcome to Carlos and Lisa. I'm Lisa Remillard.
And I'm Carlos Ameskowitz. Nice to have you with us. Immigration is a very hot topic during this election season. And with that comes controversial sanctuary city and sanctuary state policies.
Believe it or not, they're all over the country. Take a look at this map. This shows you all of the sanctuary cities lined up from coast to coast. Now, California is one of just a handful of states, including Oregon, Massachusetts, Colorado, that hold the sanctuary state policy.
Yeah,
policy,
the entire
whole
state. Yeah.
Yes.
But a sanctuary policy does several things. It limits cooperation between local law enforcement and federal immigration agents. That's been talked about a lot in the news. Of course, that's been really controversial with jails and things like that. It also limits the ability of immigration and customs enforcement to deport immigrants simply because they're in the U.S. illegally.
The policy also allows for illegal immigrants who have committed serious crimes to be turned over to ICE. It also prohibits, though, local law enforcement from asking a person about his or her immigration status.
So critics say the policy undermines public safety because it might prevent ICE officials from accessing jails and preventing ICE from being notified when an illegal immigrant is released from jail so they can be deported.
Right. So there's all these different law enforcement agencies throughout every state. You know, every jurisdiction has its own law enforcement agency, and forever they've kind of dealt with this on a case-by-case basis. Right. In the state of California, as of last year, the whole state now abides by this policy. But of course, one of the biggest critics, because it is immigration is a federal responsibility. One of the biggest critics of the sanctuary policy throughout the country is President Donald Trump.
Sanctuary cities and states like California put innocent Americans at the mercy of hardened criminals, hardened murderers in many cases. Yet House and Senate Democrats voted nearly unanimously in favor of sanctuary cities. Explain that. We're looking to have safe cities, folks. Safe cities.
All right, so that's been his policy since day one, since he started talking about immigration, that he really felt that we can't really violate American citizens' rights to public safety by allowing immigrants to come in and disrupt that. And you saw how he listed them out. He says the people who are criminals and blah, blah, blah. And he took a lot of criticism in the campaign for that, remember?
Well, he's going to continue to take a lot of criticism, and there's a lot of criticism up and down the state of California. So we asked a local professor from Cal Lutheran College of Arts and Sciences, Dr. Jessica Lavariega Monforti, to come in. She is the dean of the school.
Nice to have you here, Doctor.
How are you?
Great. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for coming in. I know you are an expert in this field. When you lay it out that way, it almost feels like the state of California, not just on this issue, but on many issues, is literally butting heads with the federal government. And in your estimation, and where we are now, is this something that is going to stand, is going to hold up, states' right versus the federal law on this?
You know, it's really interesting. As our Attorney General and President Trump have sort of declared each other enemies in some ways. And so I anticipate that the clashes will continue. But we've already seen that some part of the sanctuary laws, both in the cities and as well as in the state, have sort of been declared constitutional. And some of Trump's attempts to limit the ability of states and cities, funding and things like that, have already been shot down.
The thing that I think is probably at odds here is what is legal and what is illegal, and how you define a legal resident and an illegal resident, and that we are a nation. If we're not a nation of laws, we're not a nation at all. So how do you, in your mind, how do you justify all of that going together into some sort of sanctuary issue? I mean, this is almost a humanitarian concern against a legal concern.
Well, I don't know. I think part of the attempt is to frame it in that way, but I don't know that framing is accurate. It doesn't necessarily accurately represent sort of the history of sanctuary cities and where we are today. We have to remember that initially in the 1980s, when we started to see sanctuary cities, this really was about protecting asylees. And asylum seekers have legally engaged in a process to request a stay. And so protecting those folks was part of that initial strategy in the 80s, and it has sort of now evolved to include undocumented immigrants. And so the legality question, I don't know if that's the right question to be asking given the history of the movement.
Well, okay, so but let's talk about the legality, though. I mean, like Carlos has said, this is a country of laws. How do you protect the people? Because the critics will say that the people that are being protected by this law, perhaps, are criminals, are doing bad things in this country.
Right.
That's what Donald Trump said in that soundbite.
Well, that's what he said, but you know, but what does the opposition say on that one?
Well, I mean, I can tell you what the research says.
Tell me.
Our research says that immigrants, regardless of their status, are less likely to commit a crime than a U.S.-born citizen. Our research also tells us that sanctuary cities actually have either no impact on crime or actually have lower crime rates than cities that are not sanctuary cities. And the reason for that is because what sanctuary city policy allows to happen is some of our most vulnerable populations, like undocumented immigrants, to actually report crime that is occurring to them. An undocumented immigrant is far more likely to be a victim of crime than an aggressor of a crime.
I think it's interesting to the thing is, I think now there's the effort to separate people who are seeking asylum and refuge from oppressive governments like in El Salvador and even in Guatemala and places like that, and residents or immigrants who just want to come into the U.S. to improve their lives. So there's an effort now to separate them out. And so the question is, should we treat them equally under the law, or should they be treated differently? I think, as you said, I covered the immigration issue in the 1980s under Ronald Reagan, and there was such confusion about all of that. And I think now they're trying to separate that out, and we have these refugees coming from other parts of the world, not just Central America. So how do you justify all of that?
Well, asylum law and refugee law actually takes care of that for us. You have to actually fit into a category, a protected category. So in order to apply for those status, which is why some people are coming as undocumented, right? What they're saying is, well, I don't qualify. I'm not being persecuted in my country of origin because I belong to a protected class. But it's dangerous. Someone has threatened to kill me just because I exist in that space, or because I refuse to pay a tax to a drug cartel, or because my government is after me. And those folks don't qualify for asylum or refugee status, and there's nowhere else in the law for them to go for assistance. And so the one place I think we can all agree, including with Donald Trump, is that our immigration system is broken.
I was just gonna, I mean, look, that's another topic for another day. I was gonna ask you about that, but there's one more thing that the critics always say, and you hear it from the president all the time, and I would like you to address it, which is when criminals are incarcerated in our jails, one of his drum beats that he always says is, you're preventing ICE from knowing when they leave, and so they just get let back out into the wild, and here they are back ready to reoffend. What does the opposition say on that? Is there a public safety concern?
You know, there are instances, right? And we can all sort of point to, like, the San Francisco case, for example, but those are really anecdotal. This is not what is a broad pattern that we're seeing happen. And so the question really is, are we doing what's best for everyone, or are we making public policy decision that does impact everyone based on these handful of cases?
That's very interesting, because you have hundreds of thousands of people at the border, and maybe a small percentage of them are indeed criminals and offenders who should be either put away or deported. Thank you so much for being here. We appreciate your expertise. Absolutely.
Thank you for coming in.
All right, we'll be right back with more in just a moment.